Hi, welcome to RCSP Florida. In this video, we're going to talk about using the A7S III for wildlife videography. Is it any good for wildlife videography? That's the main question. I purchased the Sony A7S III mainly for shooting video. I have wanted to be able to shoot 4K at 120 frames per second for a long time and had to settle for HD and not 4K until now. Not only does the A7S III shoot 4K at 120 frames per second, but you also have audio, which is another new feature for 120 frames per second. This is going to be a two-part series, with part 1 being about videography and part 2 being about still photography. I'm doing this to keep the videos shorter. Even then, this video is longer than I would like, but to show you video clips takes more time for you to see how well this camera works as opposed to just showing you a still image. The still image video will be much shorter. For the last year and a half, I've been shooting either 41 megapixels with the Sony A7R III or 61 megapixels with the Sony A7R IV. The A7S III has 12 megapixels. I knew I was not going to be able to crop as heavily with this camera, and I'll show you what you can and cannot get away with if you only have 12 megapixels. The other reason I purchased this camera was to be able to shoot video in low light and low noise. The higher the megapixel count, the more noise you will have in the video or still. At the end of the video, I'll tell you my thoughts on how well the A7S III works for wildlife videography and give you some options depending on what and how you shoot. So let's get to it. The A7S III is a phenomenal video camera. It focuses quickly and tracks your subject very well. The option of shooting at 24, 30, 60, or 120 frames per second in 4K gives you a lot of options. Unlike S&Q, if you shoot 120 frames per second in the movie settings, it plays back at normal speed and you have to slow it down in post-processing. I use Premiere Pro. I generally shoot video at 120 frames per second, which gives me the option of slowing it down to 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second, or really any frame rate from 1 up to 120 frames per second. Along with the video, I also have audio, which I have never had before. That being said, you need to know that the audio also slows down so you get very long syllables in there, and you have to be aware of that. In this video, I will put on the screen at what speed the clip is being played back. I found that with these videos, I use 60 frames per second more than 120 frames per second. It needs to be a fast-moving subject to take advantage of the 120 frames per second. Otherwise, it looks like the subject is just sitting there, and you could have just as easily taken a still instead. So let's get to the videos. Just a note, these videos are not earth-shattering. They are just what I was able to capture in these 2 days. The first group of videos was shot at Fort Desoto Park, and the second group was shot at the Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive near Orlando, Florida, actually in Lake Apopka, Florida. These first few images are of an osprey. This female osprey had come back to last year's nest and appeared to be getting it ready for the new year. The male was in the vicinity as well. I tried to get a better vantage point, but there was too much brush around this tree to get a good shot, so I had to settle for what I was given. All of the birds that had been at Fort Desoto in my last several visits had been driven away by Hurricane Ada as it hit the west coast of Central Florida. The storm not only drove the birds away, but it reshaped North Beach big time. The high water and storm surge changed the landscape and made it look like a different beach. I was amazed since Hurricane Ada was only a Category 1 hurricane and quickly dropped to a strong tropical storm once it moved inland. For this reason, there were very few birds at the park. I think the least number of birds I have ever seen there. I hiked around to the other side of the tree and was at least able to get a clear shot, but she was facing the wrong direction. Sometimes you have to take what you can get. Here you see the female with a very flat fish in its talons. She snagged a flounder, and I didn't really notice she had a fish until I looked at it on the computer. The fish was just so flat it kind of blended into the top of the pole. This little colorful guy is a monk. Monks are not native to Florida and came from the pet trade. Enough monks were released into the wild that they have now bred, and there is a pretty healthy population of them in South Florida. The zoom on this image went from 100%, which is no zoom, to 238% in Premiere Pro. The resolution appears to hold up better in video than it does in stills because of the motion, so you can zoom quite a bit and keep the video looking decent. I will discuss cropping stills in the next video. You'll notice that when this sanderling walks away from the camera, it loses focus briefly and doesn't recover until the bird turns sideways, and then it regains focus. I was on zone AF, and it will focus on the nearest object in the zone if it loses focus on the main subject. This is not a problem most of the time, but with all the shells on the beach from Hurricane Eta, it is a very busy scene, and it got confused for a few seconds and then recovered. I could have reduced the AF area and gone to spot, and this would not have happened, but it would have been far more difficult to keep the bird in the focus area while they were running around. Here, this sanderling decided to hoof it, and I had a hard time keeping up with it. I played it back at 4K 120 frames per second, or 25% in Premiere Pro, which is 1/4 speed, and you can still see how fast he was moving. This is a real lens zoom and not done in post. This is the fruit of a prickly pear cactus. You need to be real careful when you pick it, or ouch. This willet was cruising around looking for snacks. Keep an eye on that piece of seaweed. When I zoom in, you can see that the piece of seaweed that pops up in the picture right into the AF zone caused the camera to refocus on the grass and not the bird. I guess this sanderling thought it was Saturday night and time for a bath. When the other bird runs into the frame, the camera refocused on him. This is going to happen from time to time, and it is okay with me because this camera is so good at shooting video. The fault was mine, but there is no way I could have anticipated that this seaweed would come up out of the water like it did. It goes under the category that stuff happens sometimes. This Dunlin is probing around looking for some goodies to eat. A ruddy turnstone is eating part of what I believe is a sea urchin. They flip them over and eat the inside of the urchin. I'm not sure what the flipping is all about, but they do it over and over again. I don't know if it is all about getting the right angle of attack or whether flipping them just reveals more goodies to eat. This willet finds a tidbit to eat. A pair of ruddy turnstones is looking for more sea urchins. This gull thinks it's time to tidy up and then scratch an itch. There, that's better. I thought this was a pretty scene with these various birds and their reflections on the sand. We have gulls, terns, and a ruddy turnstone. This is the man-made waterfall feature near the ranger's house and mulberry tree at Fort Desoto Park. I played it back in 4K 120 to slow the water way down. All of the previous images were taken at Fort Desoto Park. The following images were taken on the Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive. This is one of my favorite birds, the purple gallinule. What a beautiful bird. I was using spot AF on this shot to focus on the bird through the cattails. Zone focus would have focused on the cattails. Look at the size of this gallinule's feet. They are huge, so they can easily walk around on top of the vegetation to feed. The waviness you see in the image is caused from heat waves rising off the water in vegetation. This often happens in warm climates when the temperature gets above 80 degrees. The hotter the day, the more heat waves you get. This trio of blue-winged teal are busy snacking away. We have 2 males and 1 female. The vegetation is so thick that they do a combination of swimming and walking to get around. A lot of this vegetation will die and sink to the bottom if we get a good frost this winter. This anhinga has snagged, or should I say speared, this huge bluegill. It seems hard to believe, but this bird can really swallow that fish. It's amazing. It will take quite a long time for that to happen, so I moved on to see what else I could find. Another favorite of mine is the glossy ibis. This bird just comes alive in the sun and sparkles with golds and browns. Here we have Mr. and Mrs. Boat-tailed grackle. The all-black of the male just glistens in the sun and looks blue at times. The female is also beautiful with her tones of browns and blacks. I thought this shot was nice with the great blue heron and the yellow flowers and cattails in the background with flag lilies and dollarweed in the foreground. Here is another great blue heron with flowers and cattails along with dollarweed in the background. I don't normally photograph man-made objects in my shots, but this was kind of a pretty scene, so I made an exception. It kind of looks like this heron ate something that didn't agree with him. Here's a snowy egret with cattails and flag lilies in the background and dollarweed in the foreground. You can see from this video why it's called dollarweed. It's about the size of a silver dollar. These, however, were a slight bit bigger than that. These are the yellow flowers up close, and they are burr marigolds. This is a cormorant. He has just hopped in the water after drying his wings. When their wings are dry, they tend to float better and their back is higher out of the water. This anhinga, which people often confuse with the cormorant, is preening and oiling its feathers. A good way to remember which bird is which is that the anhinga has a straight beak and the cormorant has a hook on the end of its top beak. No hook, anhinga. Hook, cormorant. So, what do I think of this camera? It is about what I expected. It is an A7R4 with better low light and noise performance with 120 frames per second at 4K with audio. It is a great video-centric camera with great autofocus and tracking. It is also good in low light and has far less noise than the A7R3 or R4 because of a 12 megapixel sensor. The low noise is also true in normal light conditions. You can run the ISO up pretty high to get your shutter speed up high enough to freeze the action and make it tack sharp and still have a usable image or video with far less noise. Those are the pros. The cons are really not the fault of the camera, but the fault of the sensor, and it really isn't even a fault. It is just reality. A 12 megapixel sensor does not allow you to crop your video or image very much before it really starts to fall apart resolution-wise. We sometimes get spoiled with the 20, 30, 40, 50, or even 60 megapixel sensors in cameras these days that you can crop a lot and still maintain good resolution. This sensor is 12 megapixels. My first digital camera had 6 megapixels decades ago. This is a far superior sensor than that 6 megapixel sensor in my Canon Rebel, and it does a good job as long as you don't have to crop your image more than just a touch. This is true for both video and stills. If you are mainly a videographer and shoot only a few stills, then this is your camera. If you shoot some video but mostly stills and you want great resolution, this is not your camera and you will be disappointed if you buy it as your only camera. If video is important to you but you need the extra resolution so you can crop your images, the Sony A7R4 is a better choice. If you shoot mostly stills, then the A7R4 or A7R3 is a much better choice as well. Those two cameras are readily available, used, and you can get a great camera for about half the cost of the A7S III. Both the R3 and R4 have excellent autofocus for stills. The A7R3 does not have great autofocus for video, which is why I bought the A7R4 since I shoot a lot of video. For wildlife, the A7S III may not be your best choice if you want to carry only one camera. I generally carry two, so it is okay for me, but it may not be for you. It is a lot of money to pay for a camera that you use only for a few things. I may only keep it for slow motion and low light use until something better comes along. I personally like to have two cameras with me for wildlife photography. My main camera will have either the FE200 to 600mm G lens or the FE100 to 400mm GM lens, while the other camera has my FE24 to 105 G lens. I use the long lens for wildlife and the shorter lens for everything else. It will depend on what type of photography I am doing as to which two cameras I will take. I may leave the A7S III at home for some shoots if I don't anticipate shooting any slow motion or in low light. I think the A7R4 will remain my main wildlife camera since it shoots both stills and video very well, but does have significantly more noise than the A7S III. Thank goodness I have Topaz Denoise AI. I go back to what I have said in the past many times. They still haven't made the perfect camera yet and may never be able to, although they are getting much closer. I hope this helps if you are struggling to decide what camera body to buy for wildlife videography. It was a tough decision for me as well, and I depended on reviews from people I trust to help make my decision. I don't have the luxury of having enough subscribers or views to get manufacturers to send me equipment to test like some of my fellow YouTubers. I wish I did. It would make life a lot easier. I have to buy everything I review, and that is expensive. That's why I can't review as much gear as I would like. After my next video, which is part 2 of this two-part series on the A7S III, I'm going back to just shooting video and stills of wildlife and nature using whatever gear is appropriate for the task. If you have watched this channel very long, you know I am a pixel peeper, and shooting anything that isn't tack sharp drives me crazy. It will be nice to get back to just nature for a while with a review or educational video thrown in here and there. Unfortunately, gear reviews get the most views. If you like this video, please hit the like button and share this video with your friends. If you want to see more of my videos, please hit the subscribe button in the lower right corner of your screen. I would really appreciate that. Hit the bell button if you want to be notified when I post a new video. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Oh, and get out and shoot. You can't learn anything new sitting in your easy chair in your living room. If I can do it, so can you. Stay safe.